Safety, annual requirement. So, that be me. Fire and life safety. So, have any of you ever been in a fire or an evacuation where you had to get out and leave?
Yeah, but it was a car fire.
Okay. I've been in a hurricane evacuation on North Carolina Outer Banks, you know, where hurricane warning and we had to get out. And also about, back in the early 80s, we as a family were out at Newport staying in a vacation rental. And we didn't actually have to evacuate, but the next morning we smelled electrical fire, and there had been a fire in the basement. Then there was a tenant that lived down there, and they put it out. It was in the fire panel, and they were able to put it out with a piece of carpet. But you know, it was really concerning because we were not familiar with that building. We didn't know, you went out the windows. One window was like a 12-foot drop from that window. Another one was about 5 foot to a rooftop, and then to try to get off of that. But it pointed out to us that, you know, when you're in an unfamiliar place, you know, hotels, motels, vacation rentals, think about how you would get out of there. Hopefully you're familiar with, you know, you're exiting for your own home, but, you know, when you're in unfamiliar spaces, it's important to know what your evacuation routes are. You know, there's always something that could have been done to prevent. And like I say, know your space, know where you are, know you're exiting. Common fire hazards. Candles are obviously a premier one, and that's why, you know, we're not allowed to have candles in our facilities because of that. Cooking is another, you know, and this applies to you at home as well. Just last week we had a resident that left a burner on the stove with, I think it was chicken and some oil, and forgot about it and left. Well, it obviously scorched and burned and set off the smoke detector, but you know, the house smells terrible because of that. And that can happen. Fortunately, it didn't go to flame and cause any problem there. But it's not, we've had that happen in our village residence probably a dozen times over the career I've been here. One pan was an aluminum, the old aluminum-based pans, and the aluminum actually melded into the drip pan. It got that hot and formed in the drip pan. So tips for cooking, you know, especially grilling. Every Thanksgiving, people that try to deep fry a turkey on the patio, and they get too much oil in there, or the oil boils over when they're not watching, and it catches fire because it runs down on the burner. More decks and homes have been burned by trying to deep fry a turkey on the deck, or, you know, because of that. We had one incident here in the village where they had their grill up close to the wall, and he was grilling salmon, and he was, you know, going back in the house watching TV between grilling it, and that fatty skin caught fire and actually, you know, melted the siding on the house, on the vinyl siding. So you do need to be careful. Watch what you're doing. You know, you shouldn't have baggy clothes hanging down toward a burner. You know, don't use foil or silverware in the microwave, and that's why we have to have the microwaves on timers in Mennonite home, because a resident could stick something metal in there and turn it on, and that will create a fire. Do not throw water on a grease fire. If you can smother it with the lid, do that. Turn the power off. Use baking soda, so that throwing water on a grease fire just spreads that grease around and splatters it everywhere. So that's why you don't want to do that. Okay, electrical. Any of you have something like that in your home behind the computer and printer? Yeah. And that's why, again, we are not allowed to have any of these in Mennonite home. That's why we had to add additional outlets, because of that kind of hazard. Consider having additional circuits put in. Consider hiring an electrician to add more outlets for you. And some of these power strips do have overload protection on them and fuses on them. And I'm not telling you can't have a plug strip in your house, and that's fine. Because a lot of your computer equipment doesn't take very much power. But you shouldn't use that kind of thing in the kitchen, where you might be plugging in a toaster and a microwave and an oven, a tabletop oven kind of thing, or a burner plate, because they take a lot more power. Okay, heating. So furnaces, keep things away that can burn, having equipment clean. Portable heaters are the real hazard, and where a lot of home fires come from in the cold season, the portable heaters, and they get them too close to the bedding or the curtains or something like that. It's where it really can be a hazard. And then obviously smoking, which we don't allow on campus anymore, but smoking is a major contributor to fires. Dryers, again, it's good to always keep that lint filter cleaned out, and to clean out the screen. Often the louver at the outside has a screen on it, and if that gets clogged up, it can cause a problem. If your dryer takes a lot longer than normal to dry, and what you would expect, it's often because your exhaust is clogged. So if you see a lot of humidity in your utility room and the laundry takes a lot longer, you really need to consider checking the exhausting of the dryer. And we, in the village here, every winter, we have the grounds crew go around to all the homes in the village, and that's one of the things they do, is pull the dryers out, clean that ductwork, make sure that's clean, cleaning exhaust fans, cleaning the coils on the refrigerators, and cleaning those cadet heaters, because those are dangerous. Okay. The acronym that we use for response to a fire is what?
RACE.
RACE. There you go. So, again, the R being that rescue the resident or residents out of the immediate room, because they may not be able to get themselves out. And it may mean that you need to crawl into that room. If there's smoke already in the space, smoke and heat rise, so your best air and visibility is at the floor. But if you see smoke coming out from under a door, you want to check the knob with the back of your hand before you grab it to open it, because if that knob can be superheated and just burn your hand and constrict your muscles to where you can't let go of it right away, and you end up with a severe burn. So if you're ever approaching a door that you see smoke coming out from underneath, use the back of your hand first. The A then is the alarm, pull alarm. Every exit door has a pull station by it. Of Quail Run, every stairway door. We even have them across from the nurse's station in Mennonite Home for a convenience. But that is how that you would set off the alarm if the smoke detector hasn't already done that. The C then is for the contain. Like it says, very important. Far more people die from smoke inhalation than do from being burned. So closing that door after you make that rescue and making sure the door is latched, because fire is starving for oxygen and it'll suck that door open. It'll create its own draft to fuel the flames. Very important to make sure that door is latched, and then to grab something from an adjacent room, a towel, a sheet. You want to even block that crack under the door because it's sucking oxygen in under there too. This does not mean when the alarm goes off that you run around and close doors and windows and all the rooms in your hall. First, most important thing is to get to the active area and make that rescue and help with the evacuation there. Building is set up into different fire zones, from one exit door to set of smoke and fire doors, or from one set of smoke and fire to the other. So those are all safety zones. So you do not need to run around and do that right away. Go to the active area first and help out there. And if we need to do that in other areas, we can. Okay. The E then for extinguish or evacuate, depending on, if it's a TV or an outlet, you can grab a fire extinguisher and put it out. But if it's an airplane that's crashed into the building and we've got the whole wing that's an inferno, then we're doing the evacuation. It may mean that we have to take residents out the end of the hall, but we can bring them back into a space like this. Mennonite Home and the new building are built to hospital-type standards, an I2. That's why the whole building is concrete and steel. There's very little wood in there except the roof. And even the roof wood is fire-treated. They had to send it down to Roseburg to be soaked in this fire-retardant solution before they even built the trusses, so that it's very difficult for a fire to burn that wood, even the trusses that are from the rooftop. So, but yeah, the evacuation, the active room, adjacent rooms, and then the rest of that fire zone. Then it's the fire department's call when they respond, or the charge nurse as to whether we need to move those residents further away from the active zone. But we do not need to evacuate the whole building when there's a fire in the building. But obviously we need to be ready to move more residents out. Now that's not the case with Quail Run. Quail Run is an RS2 construction. So it has less fire sprinklers and less fire walls and less fire retardant stuff, and it's all a wood frame building. So in an event there, we may need to evacuate the whole building, even though we have 7 different fire zones in the building. Those are safer zones, but an evacuation would call for evacuating the whole building when it comes to Quail Run.
Just a quick question. Since it looks like we'll be moving into our new building before the end of the year, what will it be like over there? It's 3 stories. What happens then?
So what happens in the new building when you've got 3 stories? Well, each of the floors has 2 stairways and a 1-hour smoke and fire separation. So like in the hallways, there are fire doors that would close and separate each floor into 2 sections. So the protocol there would be, if you have an alarm on one side, you move everybody to the other side, and vice versa, depending on that. Rarely would we have to try to evacuate residents downstairs or out of the building. And that because that building is all concrete and steel. There's very little to burn in the building. I mean, even your carpets or furniture kind of thing, but you know, it's not going to send the whole building into an inferno because there's just hardly anything to burn, and there's sprinklers in everywhere. Even the closets have to have sprinklers. So, yeah, you know, we will have stair chairs, what they call a stair chair, to help take people downstairs, because again, you do not use an elevator in the event of a fire, because fire can burn into the electrical system and short out the electrical system, and we don't want to get caught in the elevator like poor Ron did for, you know, when the building's on fire. So that's why you do not use an elevator. Now the fire department comes in, and we have to have special keys for them that they can operate the elevator. But it's their call. If they feel it's safe to use the elevator, then they can use the elevator. But normally for us, in an evacuation, we would not ever use the elevator. Okay? Why is it important to perform regular fire drills?
So everybody knows what they're supposed to do.
Everybody knows what to do. Okay? Practice. Practice, practice. Practice makes perfect, right? So it should become instinct. When that alarm goes off, not, oh, that Dave again. It's, you know, what do I do? Well, the first thing you should do is check the area that you're working in. Are there any red lights outside the resident rooms? Is there any smoke in the area? Are there sprinklers running? And so before you report to the nurse's station to where the alarm panel is and the red light's flashing, check the area that you're in. Then you go to the nurse's station. LED window on the alarm panel says where the alarm is coming from. And this building is an addressable system, so it'll say Chapel, or it'll say Doves East, room 11. Or it'll say Admin West Hall, B15, or Lydia's house, A, room 115. It's specific as to what room the alarm is coming from. So then you report there and help out. Charge nurse should take charge of directing staff, handing out those cards and tasks that need to be done, like calling 911, even though we have an automatic dialer. That can take 90 seconds or more, and that calls a monitoring service in Portland. They in turn call the local fire department, tell them they have an alarm at Mennonite Home, but it does not tell them where the alarm is coming from. That's why one of the tasks is to send somebody out to meet the fire trucks, because if the fire is in the rehab wing, we don't want them pulling up here at the front doors. We want them back there. Clearing the halls so that the emergency services, that's why we have to get everything out of the hallways. Turn off the fans. Check for oxygen. It's a big one, because those oxygen canisters, if they get superheated, that oxygen expands and that top blows, and then that canister becomes a missile that'll blow right through the block walls with that kind of force. So that's why we have to look for and remove oxygen canisters if they're in the fire zone, if they're a hazard. Concentrators, those electric concentrators, don't store oxygen. They draw it out of the air, so we don't need to remove those. It's a good idea to unplug them so that they're not producing any oxygen, but we don't need to remove them from the space like we do the canisters. See? Moan and grumble. But no, drills are important, and you know, that's something that the fire marshal checks every year when he comes in, is the documentation. And they look to see that the drills are different times of the shift too. That they're not at 2:30, you know, every month or every third month when we have to do a swing drill. Or that they're not at 10:30 after morning break, you know, day shift. So they look for that kind of thing, different times, different types, different amounts of evacuation, and so forth, so that experience different kinds of things. So, you know, if you see anything or identify anything as a hazard or a weak point, I had a nurse show me a resident room where there's a lot of clutter in there. That can become a fire hazard. If they have a lot of cardboard and paper, you know, they look for things like that could become fuel for a fire source. Fire extinguishers located throughout the building, and those wall cabinets with those plastic covers over them, a little door on there, just pull it off the hanger there. We have an acronym for the use of them as well, the word PASS. They have that grenade-like pin on them that's held on with a plastic breakaway tab. So you pull on that tab to break, and that pulls the pin out. Most of them have that drop-down nozzle. Pick that up and aim the nozzle. First, to squeeze that handle that sets off the discharge. There's typically a powder compound in there that's designed to coat the fuel and suffocate the flames. So the heat turns that powder to a resin that gets hard and doesn't burn. So that's why you want to squeeze that handle and then use that sweeping action, aiming at the base of the flames, because like I said, you're trying to coat the fuel and suffocate the flames. So you want to start at a safe distance, and then you can move in and make sure everything's coated well, so puts out that fire. So review.
Can you go back on the pass on the A?
The A.
Sweet.
Okay, let me make that. I got it right.
Pull the pin, aim, squeeze, and sweep. Okay? Questions? Yes.
On the sprinkler system, so say there's a fire number 11, how much of the system, sprinkler system actually engages?
Okay, the question is about fire sprinklers. When there's a fire and the sprinkler set off, does the whole system go off or does just one? Actually, it's unlike you see in the movies. The movies dramatize it, so they break one and they all go off, and so they can escape the building. No, every sprinkler is fire rated at like 130 degrees, and so when it gets 130 degrees at the ceiling, there's a glass bulb in there that has a liquid in there with an expansion coefficient, so that it expands enough in that heat to break the glass, and that lets the water flow. So they only go off one at a time as they get hot enough to break that glass, to start that flow. But once that flow has started, it don't stop until Dave gets there and turns the main off. And then we have to replace the head in order to reactivate the system. But yes, sprinklers only go off one at a time in the heat. Now, I've seen a video where they showed a cigarette butt left on a chair, and it just smoldered. From the time that chair went to flame, within 20 seconds it was 600 degrees at the ceiling.
Wow.
So that's how fast that can happen. Now, we had an incident some years ago in Ashwood 1 where the lady heated up water for tea on her burner, on her stovetop. And she poured her tea and turned off the burner, but electric burners get red hot and take a while to cool down. Well, as she left the kitchen with her tea, a bag of tortilla chips slid down onto the burner, unbeknownst to her. Well, the bag melted, the chips caught fire, and actually got hot enough to set off that sprinkler, and the sprinkler put out the fire. It also set off the alarm, and she comes tottering back in the kitchen and just got soaked, but the fire was already out. The fire department responded, but again, the fire was already out. But that water ran for 20 minutes before they got a hold of me to come in and shut off the water. So we had far more damage from the water than we did from the fire. The sprinkler was very effective. There was enough fire and heat there that it burned the microwave above the stove and damaged the cabinet and obviously the stove. But, we had more water to clean up. We were able to move her into another apartment, and a week later we had it cleaned up and put back together, and she was able to move back into her apartment. So sprinklers are very, very effective. But yeah, once they're on, they're running until you get it shut off and get it replaced. Any other questions or comments? The new building, yeah, obviously, we'll have sprinklers as well. It'll all be connected just like our current building. I mean, it will be tied into all the existing. When you have a contiguous building like this, any alarm in any part of the building needs to ring through the whole building. So just like it is now in that new build, when there's an alarm, it's going to ring on all floors of that new building. If there's one over there, it's going to ring all the way through to Lydia's house. Still an addressable system. Everything will show up on the same alarm panels we have. But if there's an alarm in the new build, 3rd floor, we'll have to respond to that area to help out.
Yeah, right now, the laundry department doesn't hear those alarms.
Well, you will when you're in the new building, because you'll be right in there. Yes?
I just want to clarify, because with the last practice, the most confusing part for me was that, and something you said earlier, was that you wanted us all to respond to that area. If we see, that, well, if we do that, we have people that are hearing the alarm, and these are 97, 98, 89-year-old people that are, terrified, and somebody needs to stay behind.
Yes.
Are there going to be designated people, like are our teammates going to be the ones that respond to the area, and then via radio let us know if they need us to swarm it, and if they need more hands and more help? Because somebody needs to stay with the residents too.
They do, and that is the protocol that, when an alarm goes off, the nurses are to check, everybody's supposed to go find out where, but
Right, absolutely.
the charge nurse should stay themselves or assign somebody so there's at least one person in every wing left behind to stay with those residents and answer their questions and concerns and let them know that they're not in jeopardy at this point. You'll be there with them. Should they need to evacuate, there'll be staff come to help evacuate them. But yeah, and to make sure that, it's not much of a problem in Menai Home because they can't get themselves out of the building very well, if at all. But Lydia's house, that's why when an alarm goes off, their locked doors are released, because anytime there's an alarm in the building, those magnets have to be released. So they have to stay with their residents to make sure they don't exit. That's why they don't come up and help here, but we do go down and help there, because
Makes sense to keep them.
particularly at night, there's 3 people down there. At night, there should be anywhere from 7 to 9 in Midnight Home. But, that's what scares me about Quail Run. You got a 2-story building, you got 100 residents in there, and from 11 to 5, there's 3 staff in the building. So, that's why I tell them they have to take charge. They have to be like a drill sergeant and just start yelling orders and get residents that come out of their apartments to link arms, hands, and go out of the building. And they can't spend their time, with just one person. They got to be yelling directions and have those people do as much as they can themselves, because there's only 3 of them there. And there's still 100 residents in the building, and in that building, like I said, they're supposed to evacuate the whole building, not just a fire zone. But the fire zone is first, and the active one is first, and then out from there. Okay, other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.